Well, hello. Glad you could join us, and we are prepared to start our weekly Friday night Bible study. And this is the week. Every fourth week we do our sermon presentation on Saturday mornings, so you can expect that. And we're pre-recording this because of the troubles we have with streaming in the evening hours. I expect that I will do um, the Saturday morning sermon presentation live. It's prepared and ready to go on my computer here, so that'll be simple to do. We mentioned at the beginning of last week's program that we had flowers popping up in our yard, and we thought about it a little late. We wanted to get pictures. So I went out earlier this week, and got some pictures, and here they are. My wife has offered some opinions that maybe these are jonquils, or what was the other flower you thought they might be?
Crocus.
Crocus? Yeah. And you can tell they're from the dried leaves laying on the lawn, about the size of these flowers. They're quite small. This probably would have looked a little bit better because you see there's a few dead blooms laying on the ground around this. If I had gotten them a week earlier, not a week earlier, but a few days earlier when we suggested it last week. And I got several shots. I got 3 shots of this particular one. You saw kind of jerked there. I actually went to another picture. And then I moved in just a little bit closer to get that shot. And then there is another bunch of them in the yard. So I got that shot as well. So those are the little flowers we have in our yard. Maybe if you know what they are, you could uh, put a comment on the video in the group, and we would find out about it. We'd know about it.
Well, I'll tell you what,
But
you and I think they're flowers, but most of the people here in this area call them weeds.
well, in the lawn, technically, yes, they are weeds.
But they're pretty.
Yeah, and the thing is, oh my, this computer. I'm not sure what this is doing. I can't see the main screen. It's just gone away. I wonder if this computer is going belly up on me here. Um, let's.
I see a question somebody has posted on Facebook, and it's shown up on my feed.
Oh yeah.
Why does SDA thinks they're the true church?
Uh,
Question, guys. Not joking. In other words, I believe.
well, I mean, everybody, just about everybody, thinks they're the true church, and that
Yeah.
is more true of non-mainstream organizations. Mainstream organizations, the really big ones, Baptist, Methodist, Presbyterian, they are less likely to make claims that they're the one true church. But the smaller organizations that have split off from these larger ones over whatever belief, teaching, issue, these organizations have a tendency to believe that the reason they split off is because they're right and everybody else is wrong.
So what's the term when somebody leaves the church and starts their own? What do you call that? An offshoot church? What do you call that kind of person?
Well, offshoot is one term that gets used for it. Did you have another term in mind?
Well, I'm thinking there is, but I can't think of it. Anyway, we were taught to stay away from offshoots. You know, they're heathens. Yet, if you stop and look at how the church was, the founders of the church, didn't they leave their church and start a new one? Meaning that the Adventist church is an offshoot.
Well, yeah, technically, yeah. It's and people joined the Millerite movement out of a lot of different churches. Miller himself kind of got his start in a Baptist church. In fact, I think it was a Baptist church that offered him the first.
Anabaptist.
What?
Did you say Baptist or Anabaptist?
Baptist.
Okay.
I believe his first invitation to preach came from a Baptist church near his home in extreme eastern New York. So, I think I found the problem here. I reset the HDMI connector to my second monitor, and my main monitor has come up. So I was worried we might have to quit recording here and start over once I got the problem solved, but I think we've got it solved now, so I think we're about ready to go. Another thing that we're going to do right now, I did have a Bible question. I had it already. I answered this nearly 2 weeks ago, and I had it last week. I just forgot to print it out and present it. So here it is, and I'll just read that now, and then we'll move on. This comes from someone named Joey, and he asks, where did Jesus' soul go the 3 days he was in the tomb? Dear Joy, thank you, and thank you for submitting your question about Jesus' soul. You may have in mind the following text. For Christ died for sins once for all, the righteous for the unrighteous, to bring you to God. He was put to death in the body, but made alive by the Spirit, through whom also he went and preached to the spirits in prison who disobeyed long ago, when God waited patiently in the days of Noah while the ark was being built. 1 Peter 3:18-20. Now, some interpreters say this means that during those 3 days Jesus went to hell and preached to the people there, including those residents of hell who got a short trip ticket there in the waters of the global flood of Noah's day. But that interpretation relies on a common misunderstanding about the nature of a human soul. Genesis 2:7 says the human soul came into existence At the moment that God breathed the breath of life, and I put that in quotes, into the body he had created from the elements or dust of the earth. Later, in Ecclesiastes 12, we find a poetic description of human bodily decline leading to death. Solomon concludes this description with these words, "And the dust returns to the ground it came from, and the spirit returns to God who gave it." Ecclesiastes 12:7. The Hebrew for spirit has similar meaning to the word for breath in Genesis 2. So we see the reversal of the creation process. A lot of people read the verse I just quoted, the Ecclesiastes 12:7, and say that the soul is the spirit that returns to God. Let me give you an illustration. Suppose I take a group of wooden boards cut for the purpose and use staples to arrange them in the form of a crate. Where was the crate before my creative act? It didn't exist. Now, imagine I reverse the process. I pull all the staples and stack the wood. Where is the crate? It no longer exists. What is the soul? It is the thinking, self-aware portion of the human being. Today, we're aware that these functions reside in the brain. After death, the life processes no longer sustain the union of atoms that form the brain, and it decays and rots. No brain, no thinking, no self-awareness, no soul. Now, with Jesus, things are a little more complicated. Jesus emptied himself of his divinity, that's the meaning of Philippians 2 verse 7, and became human. When the body died on the cross, the human soul ceased to exist. But the divine Jesus did not. Some interpreters even believe that the divine Jesus waited for the angel to call on Resurrection Sunday and then gave life to his human body, enabling him to appear to his followers. And that is the hope of the resurrection. A mere reunification of body and soul wouldn't be worth the value Paul places on the resurrection in 1 Corinthians 15. There he says that without the resurrection, we would have no hope. If the resurrection is the resurrection of the soul that ceased to exist at death, giving us a body that will not die, then it's worth all the attention we pay to it. So how shall we understand the text in 1 Peter I opened with? Note that the text doesn't say when Jesus, by the Spirit, preached to the spirits in prison. It merely says that he preached with the same Spirit that made him alive after humans had made him dead. If we speak of the human soul of Jesus during the time in the tomb, that soul did not exist. From the human Jesus' perspective, one moment he cried, "It is finished." The next moment he rose from the tomb, folded away the grave clothes, and stepped out triumphant. So with us. One moment we pass from this life. The very next moment we hear the trumpet call of 1 Corinthians 15 and 1 Thessalonians 4 and rise to meet Jesus in the air to spend eternity with him. I look forward to that time, as I'm sure you do. Let's focus on our relationship with God to be certain we do not fail at receiving the prize. Regular Bible study is one part of that relationship, so I encourage you to make that a habit. Sincerely, and my name and position and the organization I work with, all named there at the bottom.
So, did you ignore the belief that Jesus died and went to hell?
I thought that's what I just got done talking about.
I missed it.
Well, I read that text out of, I think it's out of First Peter, is it? Yeah, First Peter 3, where it says that by the same Spirit he went and preached to the spirits in prison. The question was, where did Jesus' soul go the 3 days he was in the tomb?
And the belief is he went to hell.
Yeah. He went to hell and he preached there for 3 days and then he came back.
Yeah.
It's essentially, that's what I was addressing in that answer, was this idea that after he died, Jesus went to hell and preached. Anyway. And we had a little bit of confusion at our house this morning, or around noon, I guess. I think we've mentioned that there have been trucks and workmen in our neighborhood for the last few weeks. The local gas utility hired a plumbing company to come out and to put in new gas lines throughout our neighborhood. I don't know if they're doing the whole city, but we're at least doing our neighborhood. They've been in our neighborhood for the last several weeks.
Forever. They've been right outside my bedroom window forever.
Well, it might seem that way. It hasn't been that long, but yeah, they've been out there for a while. And yeah, they tend to drive by, and given that we're retired and sleep odd hours, sometimes they're driving their big diesel pickups by the bedroom window when we're asleep. Anyway, today was the day to cut over from the old lines to the new lines. And in order to do that, they, of course, have to shut the gas off, and then they disconnect our meter from the old gas line and hook it up to the new gas line. And then after they do that, then the gas company itself comes through and checks the work, makes sure everything is done properly and there's no leaks. And then they turn the gas on and come into our house, and they had to come into our house and relight the water heater. Our furnace is self-igniting, so we didn't have to mess with that. I turned it off while the gas was off so it wouldn't try to come on, and then once they assured me the gas was back on, I turned it on again. It came on, fired right up, and started heating. So that went without a hitch. The reason I'm mentioning this is that they knocked on the front door. Now, our house has a settlement problem. The ground beneath it is settling, and so that makes the house lean and tilt and crack and other little things because it's not sagging down evenly. Some parts are sagging faster than others. And one of the results of that is that the frame for the front door is skewed and the latch doesn't meet right, and so the door has to be propped closed, so it's not available for use. So we put a sign on the front door that says, please. Huh? What'd you say?
I said you can't push it open, so don't come and try.
Well, essentially the sign says that the door doesn't work, please come to the carport door. So I wondered why they knocked on the front door. And, I told the guy, come around to the carport door. But that was the guy from the plumbing company. I met him. He talked and we talked about what was going to happen, and then he went on his way and started doing his work. Uh, but then when the gas company guy came, he knocked on the front door. So I went to the back door at first because I wasn't in the right room. I couldn't tell where the knock happened. I went to the back door first. There was nobody there. So then I hollered at the front door, didn't hear anybody. So I went around outside, and the guy had walked around to the side of the house. So then I thought, well, why do people keep knocking on the front door? So I looked, and we didn't have a sign there. So before we got started recording this today, I typed up a new sign, printed it off, and took it out and taped it to the screen door so that people will know that our front door doesn't work. Don't knock on that door, come around to the side there. We can open that door and let you in, so on and so forth. So, I think we're about ready to begin.
Yeah, our castle is made out of a cracker box. I married a prince.
Yeah, right. A rich one at that.
Yeah.
Spent a whole $50,000 on his house.
Huh?
Let's bow our heads and we'll begin. Our Father in heaven, we thank you for your blessings to us. We thank you that we have the ability to set some time aside to study the written word. We're thankful that we have the written word as a guide to lead us to Jesus Christ, the living word. As we open this written word now, and as we contemplate what we read, we ask that the Holy Spirit will come with us and interpret to us what we read and how we understand, that we might receive an accurate view of you and your character. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Hey,
So,
by the way, I love my house.
yeah. Well, it was a fixer-upper when we got it, and it's still sort of a fixer-upper, but it's warm in the winter and cool in the summer, and it doesn't let rain fall on us. So it provides the bulk of the services you expect a house to provide to you. So we don't complain. So what we have up now is Genesis 12. We have in 11 chapters of this book covered some 2,500 years of world history. Now, if you believe, as some do, that the earth is only about 6,000 years old, then that makes those 11 chapters cover roughly a third, in fact, over a third of the earth's history. And seeing as the Bible narrative cuts off at a few years into what we now call Common Era, or years AD if you want to use the older designation. We've got now almost 2,000 years of Earth's history that aren't mentioned in the Bible at all. So in 11 chapters we've covered 2,500 or more years of Earth's history, and the rest of the Bible covers about 1,500 years, roughly. So we have in a relatively short period of time and in very little narrative in the Bible covered a great, huge heap of world history. And while we're discussing that, let's get into the issue that we kind of mentioned briefly last week, and that is the wording of the Septuagint to include an additional generation between okay, that's not the one I wanted, and that's not the one I wanted. So I think what's happened is Microsoft has figured out how to put in put things in more different places, and I'm having trouble finding the section I want. And that's not it.
Don't talk to me about Microsoft. I've got a brain the size of a planet, and yet I have to get stuck with Microsoft.
Yeah. What I'm going to have to do is, I'm pretty sure I can find what I want this way. Yeah, let me just call this up like this, and then we'll switch the screen here like this so you can see. So what we've got on this chart is what's in most Hebrew manuscripts. From what I read, there's only one that includes the stuff that the Septuagint includes. So you have Noah, Shem, Arphaxad, and then Shelah. The Septuagint includes a generation between, I think it's Shem and Arphaxad, someone known as Canaan. And Luke, when he wrote out his genealogy of Jesus, working backwards from Jesus to Adam, he included that Canaan between Shem and Arphaxad. And if you look at the years given there, and we looked into that through the footnotes last week, there are an additional 230 years in that account that are not in this account. And I said at the time I wasn't really clear why that might be the case. So, but I've thought about it, and I've come across an odd idea. And this is just kind of speculation on my part. We know that there are people in our day who have gone to quite a lot of trouble to arrange the narrative of the Bible into a history of 6,000 years, putting the creation at roughly 4000 BCE. BCE standing for before the Common Era. BC was the old designation. So they kind of fiddle the numbers a little bit to get things to fit into that model. And part of the thinking for that was that when we studied the book of Revelation, we read about a millennium or 1,000 years. If you say that the earth is 6,000 years old, and then the millennium begins, and this was quite the fervor back about the turn of the century, from the 1990s to the 2000s. There was a lot of talk that Well, there were 6 millennia of Earth history. So the seventh one to finish out the week, and the Sabbath millennium would be the millennium after the second coming. Were you aware of that kind of speculation taking place?
Well, I'm sitting here stuck on Marvin the Paranoid Android. Life. Don't talk to me about life. I've got a brain the size of a planet.
Yeah.
And what do they ask me to do? Blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
I love Microsoft, by the way, because I'm not smart enough to understand anything about the computer. No, what you're saying, did we? This is sounding familiar. Did we talk about this earlier by any chance?
We might have briefly mentioned it.
I came across this earlier, recently, and I can't really remember what was said or where I heard it. But I do think I asked a question, and I think you told me something, and then you said it kind of raises an eyebrow about the people who insist that the world is only 6,000 years old.
Hmm. Well, we kind of got off on a.
And I'm not even sure that you did that. I may have dreamed it. No, I don't remember.
Well, we kind of got off on a tangent there, but the reason I went off on that was to point out that people will tend to manipulate history a little bit to make it fit a particular scenario.
Well, yeah. Like, what is that? About Christopher Columbus was nice to the Indians or something.
Mm.
There's a school curriculum out there that teaches that.
Yeah, we call it revisionist history.
Okay.
The point I'm making is, and we saw this phenomena in Matthew's gospel when he spelled out the genealogy of Jesus. He left out some generations that we find in the Old Testament account of the kings of Judah. He left some of those generations out so that when he got done, there would be 14 generations from Abraham to the Exodus, 14 generations from the Exodus to the Babylonian captivity, and 14 generations from the captivity to Jesus Christ. So he kind of messed with things a little bit to make that come out that way.
Numerology.
Yeah. So, given that Jews are likely to do that kind of thing, and given the time that the Septuagint was created, which would have been, well, we're not sure. It was during the Greek, when Greece was in charge of things. So probably 200 or 300 years before Christ. And I'm wondering if maybe as they were translating their Bible into Greek, their Talmud into Greek, if they were thinking that the earth ought to be 4,000 years old at that point in history. And since it was a little bit less than that, they needed to add a few years into it. And so maybe what they did right there in this section was to add that 230 years that they needed roughly, if this was, say, 230 or so BC, and they wanted to make the Bible account reached that far and they did the kinds of things that people do today, then they would have needed a few extra years to make the earth 4,000 years old. And so that might explain why they inserted a generation and 230 years in there. That's just a guess, just some speculation. That might be why. And while we can't say for certain that that one Hebrew manuscript and Septuagint are wrong, we would suggest that the evidence that the bulk of the Hebrew manuscripts don't include that generation, that they're more accurate than the Septuagint and that one Hebrew manuscript. So anyway, so we've been sitting here looking at Genesis 12, and Genesis 12 is the point at which this book quits looking at the history of the whole world and now begins to focus on the history of the Jewish nation. Because the Jewish nation traces its identity to this man, Abram.
There they are outside the window again.
Oh, the plumbing company with their trucks?
Yeah.
So, Genesis 12, starting at verse 1, the Lord had said to Abram, "Leave your native country, your relatives, and your father's family, and go to the land that I will show you. I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you and make you famous, and you will be a blessing to others. I will bless those who bless you and curse those who treat you with contempt. All the families on earth will be blessed through you." Now, where did this happen? Well, if we read on in verse 4, it says, "So Abram departed as the Lord had instructed, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he left Haran. He took his wife Sarai, his nephew Lot, and all his wealth, his livestock, and all the people he had taken into his household at Haran, and headed for the land of Canaan." So, we ask the question now, at what point did the Lord tell Abram to leave his native country, his relatives, his father's family, and go to a different land? Was it at the point described here in verse 4, when Abram was 75 years old, or was it earlier, before Abram and his father and some of the other members of his family left Ur of the Chaldees to go to Haran, where they settled down?
I have a question.
Ask.
Are we doing a repeat of last week?
No. No, we're referring to events out of chapter 11 that we read last week, when we read how Terah and his son Abram and his grandson Lot, who was the son of a deceased son of Terah, left Ur of the Chaldees and went to a place that they called Haran. And I've always thought that maybe Terah named it after his deceased son. Now, well, I was wondering. I'll have to research this some more. I had gotten the impression that there was somewhere in the Bible, in the New Testament, that talked about Abraham being called out of Ur of the Chaldees. But I'm looking at Hebrews 11, the 8th chapter, and it says, and I'm reading it here from the NIV, "By faith Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. By faith, he made his home in the promised land like a stranger in a foreign country. He lived in tents, as did Isaac and Jacob, who were heirs with him of the same promise. For he was looking forward to the city with foundations, whose architect and builder is God. And then it goes on to talk about how by faith he received Isaac as his son.
Wasn't he called to move twice?
Well, that's the narrative that often gets told, that God came to him and told him to leave, and he took his family with him when he left Ur. And then later he gets called again, or at some point he goes on and follows God's leading into Canaan, having not reached there, and waiting to do that. Some suggest until after his father passed away, but if our diagram is right, he would have had to leave, because it says here he left when he was 75, and Haran would have lived, Terah would have lived past when Abram was 75, so unless, as some suggest, he died at 145 instead of 205, and maybe that's because some people think, well, he died and then Abraham left, or Abram, as he's called so far in the narrative. So I would say, based on Genesis, he only gets called once, and that is while he's in Haran. And he leaves his family, except for Lot, and goes on toward the promised land. In which case, we don't have any narrative explanation for why Terah and his sons left Ur. Anyway, we've read through verse 5, parts of verse 5. We stopped when we got to the land of Canaan. When they arrived in Canaan, Abram traveled through the land as far as Shechem. There he set up camp beside the oak of Moreh. At that time, the area was inhabited by Canaanites. Now, Shechem is going to become important later in the book of Genesis. And whether or not it had that name at the time that Abram traveled there, or whether they used that name because it got that name later, I'm going to guess that a lot of times we read names in the book of Genesis and they are names of the place that would be, that the people of the time the book was written would relate to, and not necessarily the names at the time of the narrative.
The names that they themselves called it personally.
Yeah.
But not its real actual name.
Yeah, well, I mean, place names change over time. So, it used to be Constantinople, and then they changed it to Istanbul. And we used to call it Bombay, and now we call it Mumbai. We used to call it Peking, now it's Beijing. Most of those changes, well, the last two of those changes are based on how we anglicize the original language names for the cities. The renaming of Constantinople to Istanbul was an actual renaming of the city. So place names change over time, and we talk about Persia, and we say, well, that's modern day Iran. It's easier for us to identify Iran because that's on our maps today. We know where that is. We know where Tehran is. If you say Persia, well, how do you relate to that? Well, if you say Iran, then we know where Persia was. So that may be the case here in Genesis, that he's calling the place Shechem, but we're going to see later how the city may well have received its name, and if that's the case, then it wouldn't have had that name at this point in time when Abram travels there. We're just identifying where Abram was. Then the Lord appeared to Abram and said, I will give this land to your descendants. I've already looked up that footnote. That footnote A is the only one in this chapter. And the footnote says that the Hebrew is seed. I will give this land to your seed, but seed means descendants, so they just clarified it a little bit by being interpreted there. And Abram built an altar there and dedicated it to the Lord who had appeared to him. After that, Abram traveled south and set up camp in the hill country, with Bethel to the west and Ai to the east. Now, the name Bethel hasn't been given to it yet, because the name Bethel, or house of God, was given to it by Jacob after he spent the night there and had the vision of the angels and the ladder extending from heaven down to earth. There he built another altar and dedicated it to the Lord, and he worshiped the Lord. Now, another issue we might mention here, because we've kind of run across it already a few times, and that is the issue of animal sacrifice. And we question whether or not God instituted animal sacrifice in the garden after Adam and Eve had eaten the fruit and believed the lies. And when it says that he made them clothing from the skin of an animal, it doesn't say he killed it, but that's often the interpretation given to that verse, that in fact God killed an animal and he taught them to worship him through animal sacrifice. We question that because we think that could be seen as putting a negative light on God's character. You have to worship me by killing animals. And so we tend to believe, and we're not going to be able to prove this, and you're free to disbelieve this if you want to. We tend to believe that animal sacrifice was something that humans came up with in their misunderstanding of God. But certainly by the time of Abram, it was a pretty well widely established concept that worship, whatever deity you might worship, worship involved animal sacrifice. That's how you engaged in worship. So that for Abram to build an altar and offer animal sacrifices, that's just Abram doing what he believed was required of him based on the culture of his time. Now, we finished at the end of verse 8 there, so let's go on. Verse 9, then Abram continued traveling south by stages toward the Negev. The Negev is what is today a largely desert area in the south of Israel. And I'm not going to try and place it exactly, but it is towards the south, and that's why Abram keeps moving south until he reaches the Negev. I'm going to guess that at the time the Negev was a fertile plain and the kind of territory that Abram needed in order to support the large household and large flocks and herds that he had at that point in time. His holdings had increased while they lived at Haran, and he took those all with him, so he had to move all the animals and all the household servants and the other people who had joined him. I've heard estimates that Abram's household was in the neighborhood of 1,000 people, when he moved into Canaan. So that's a lot of people to move. You'd need a lot of animals because they would have eaten a partially meat diet, so they would need a lot of animals to provide the food. That's why they had all those herds and flocks. Not to mention for milk and other purposes. Verse 10, at that time a severe famine struck the land of Canaan, forcing Abram to go down to Egypt where he lived as a foreigner. Now we might get into this at a future point, but we're seeing here the beginnings of a period of climate instability. And there are various suggestions for what might have caused that climate instability. But we have what was normally a fertile area, and it gets struck by famine. And it was so bad that Abram had to leave the area and go down to Egypt, where the Nile provided adequate water for watering the fields. So there was food in Egypt. And they had enough for people to go there, for them to host refugees from the regions around them who were being pushed out of their home countries by famine. And we're not told how long this was here. Probably not very long. Isaac was born when Abram was 100. He left Haran when he was 75. So you only have 25 years to play with there. So it likely wasn't very long at all that he spent in Egypt. But he would have spent some time there because of the famine. As he was approaching the border of Egypt, Abram said to his wife Sarai, "Look, you are a very beautiful woman. When the Egyptians see you, they will say, 'This is his wife. Let's kill him, then we can have her.' So, please tell them you are my sister. Then they will spare my life and treat me well because of their interest in you." What characteristics are we seeing in Abram at this point in this part of the story? Hello?
Yeah.
Well, I'm asking you,
Sorry, I fell asleep.
what character... Well, we just read about Abram going to Egypt because of famine in Canaan.
Yeah.
And he tells Sarah, "Hey, you're beautiful. When the Egyptians see you, they might want to kill me so they can have you. So please tell them you are my sister. Then they will spare my life and treat me well because of their interest in you." And I'm asking you, what characteristic are we seeing in Abram when he does this?
Fear.
Fear and
Disregard for the safety of his wife.
yeah, selfishness. Hey, they might want to have sex with you. And if they know that I'm your husband, they might kill me in order to do that. So tell them you're my sister. That won't stop them from having sex with you, but it might stop them from killing me.
Well, women were just possessions, not people.
Well, yeah, and certainly, we're seeing some of the results of a patriarchal culture, and the fact that she went along with it says to us that she was steeped in that patriarchal culture and believed that she needed to obey her husband and do what he said. Reading on, and sure enough, when Abram arrived in Egypt, everyone noticed Sarai's beauty. When the palace officials saw her, they sang her praises to Pharaoh, their king, and Sarai was taken into his palace. Then Pharaoh gave Abram many gifts because of her: sheep, goats, cattle, male and female donkeys, male and female servants, and camels. But the Lord sent terrible plagues upon Pharaoh and his household because of Sarai, Abram's wife.
Did he really? Or was it a natural cause of
Or did God perhaps partially lift his protection, and an enemy of humanity saw an opportunity to get in and cause trouble for somebody, little regard for who it was, and so he went in and caused trouble for Pharaoh and the Egyptians because he was being allowed to do so. But there was a purpose to that, and that was to prevent a mistake on Pharaoh's part. So in that sense, we might say, yes, the Lord did, since he allowed it, send the terrible plagues upon Pharaoh and his household. So Pharaoh summoned Abram and accused him sharply. "What have you done to me?" he demanded. "Why didn't you tell me she was your wife? Why did you say she is my sister and allow me to take her as my wife? Now then, here's your wife. Take her and get out of here." Pharaoh ordered some of his men to escort them, and he sent Abram out of the country along with his wife and all his possessions. So it sounds to me like when Pharaoh learned the truth, he got pretty angry. You come here as a climate refugee, and you lie to me about the identity of this beautiful woman, and I almost end up sinning with her. Get out of here. I don't want you in my sight anymore. Leave my country. Now, the next question is, how did Pharaoh figure out that Sarai was Abram's wife?
maybe he had sex with her and discovered she wasn't a virgin?
Well, that's possible. The narrative here suggests that the clue that Pharaoh got was the terrible plagues that happened to him. And it makes me wonder. We know that Pharaoh had spiritual advisors, magicians, astrologers type personnel who consulted him. It makes me wonder.
Why have I come up with the thought that oh, this may be an Ellen thing. I forgot about Ellen. I've come up with the idea here that somewhere we were taught that all the women in Pharaoh's household suddenly became barren.
That's a different story. We'll probably get to it pretty soon,
Okay.
and you'll see where that comes from.
Okay.
But what I'm suggesting here is that Pharaoh's spiritual advisors got summoned to tell him, why are all these terrible things happening to us? Now, one possibility is that what's happening here is entirely natural, that there was climate instability at that point in Earth's history. That's why there was famine in Canaan, and this climate instability led to problems of whatever sort, that doesn't identify it here, in Egypt. But at any rate, it is possible then that he summoned his spiritual advisors and asked them why this is happening, and through their mystic arts, they were able to conclude that Sarai was Abram's wife, and to tell Pharaoh, you better keep hands off that woman because we have determined that
Maybe they figured out that the problem started when he took her and he confronted her and asked her why, and she told him.
yeah, that's possible. The narrative we have here doesn't tell us how Pharaoh knew. It suggests it had something to do with the plagues, and it says that then he summons Abram and accuses him and sends him out of the country because of that. Now, this is not the only such incident. This is the first such incident. Moving on to chapter 13. So Abram left Egypt and traveled north into the Negev, along with his wife and Lot and all that they owned. Abram was very rich in livestock, silver, and gold. And while he was in Egypt, because of the lies he told to Pharaoh, he was given more by Pharaoh. So now he had more animals and more wealth and more people in his household. From the Negev, they continued traveling by stages toward Bethel, and they pitched their tents between Bethel and Ai, where they had camped before. This was the same place where Abram had built the altar, and there he worshipped the Lord again. Lot, who was traveling with Abram, had also become very wealthy with flocks of sheep and goats, herds of cattle, and many tents. But the land could not support both Abram and Lot with all their flocks and herds living so close together. Another indication of the climate instability. There was a famine. Well, before the famine was over, Abram and Lot got kicked out of Egypt. So now they've got more stuff than the land will support. So they have to do something about it. So disputes broke out between the herdsmen of Abram and Lot. At that time, Canaanites and Perizzites were also living in the land. So even more load on the land, requiring it to produce food for all these people. Finally, Abram said to Lot, let's not allow this conflict to come between us or our herdsmen. After all, we are close relatives. The whole countryside is open to you. Take your choice of any section of the land you want, and we will separate. If you want the land of the left, then I'll take the land on the right. If you prefer the land on the right, then I'll go to the left. Now, this story is often read as an indication of Abram's magnanimity and unselfishness, pointing out to us that people can display both unselfishness and selfishness in the same person at roughly the same period in their life. That we aren't
Like asking for tea and no tea.
Yeah, we aren't all just one thing. Depending on the situation, different characteristics can come forward. So here, Abram is the uncle, so he's older. He would, by that logic, have the right to say, I'll go here, you go there, and pick what he wanted. But he gives the choice to his nephew. So reading on, starting at verse 10, Lot took a long look at the fertile plains of the Jordan Valley in the direction of Zoar. The whole area was well watered everywhere, closer to the river. Yeah, you got water. Like the garden of the Lord of the beautiful land of Egypt. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. Lot chose for himself the whole Jordan Valley to the east of them. he went there with his flocks and servants and parted company with his uncle Abram. So Abram settled in the land of Canaan, and Lot moved his tent to a place near Sodom and settled among the cities of the plain. But the people of this area were extremely wicked and constantly sinned against the Lord. Now notice it just says they constantly sinned. We've talked about this in the past, what the sin of Sodom was. It's not what most people usually think it is, although that was certainly also a sin as well, or the results of sin in the life, perhaps we should say. After Lot had gone, the Lord said to Abram, "Look as far as you can see in every direction, north and south, east and west. I am giving all this land, as far as you can see, to you and your descendants," and I'm sure that's going to say or seed, "as a permanent possession. I will give you so many descendants that like the dust of the earth they cannot be counted. Go and walk through the land in every direction, for I am giving it to you." So Abram moved his camp to Hebron and settled near the oak grove belonging to Mamre. There he built another altar to the Lord. And there's the footnote. Just as we suspected, the descendants is a rendition of the Hebrew for seed. And do we have time for another chapter? I think we just might. We've got a little over 20 minutes left, so. About this time, war broke out in the region. King Amraphel of Babylonia, or footnote will probably tell us Chaldea. Shinar. Oh, all right. The Hebrew says Shinar then. Shinar, Chaldea, Babylon, all pretty much the same place. King Arioch of Elasar, King Chedorlaomer of Elam, and King Tidal of Goyim fought against King Bera of Sodom, King Bersha of Gomorrah, King Shinab of Admah, King Shemeber of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, also called Zoar. So here are 4 kings coming in against 5 kings. But we shouldn't assume that 5 against 4 gives you the advantage, because the size of the cities is going to matter, and is going to determine the size of the army that a particular king might be able to bring with him in a campaign like this. So we've got the 4 kings: Amraphel of Babylonia, or Shinar, Arioch of Elasar, Chedorlaomer of Elam, and Tidal of Goyim, against the 5 kings of the Jordan plain. Now recall, that's where Lot has moved. He has set up his tent near Sodom, and Sodom is one of the cities. Sodom, Gomorrah, and 3 other cities are the ones now under attack. This second group of kings joined forces in Siddim Valley, that is the valley of the Dead Sea, and they've got a footnote there to tell us Hebrew says Salt Sea. All right. For 12 years they had been subject to King Chedorlaomer, but in the 13th year they rebelled against him. And this is the practice of suzerainty. Suzerainty is where one king defeats another king and allows him to remain in power over his people, but subject to the king who is now his suzerain, who's in charge of him, and the subject king, the subjected king, becomes the vassal. So these 5 kings were vassals to King Chedorlaomer, but then they rebelled against him in the 13th year, after 12 years of being subject. 1 year later, Chedorlaomer and his allies arrived and defeated the Rephaites at Astaroth Carnium, the Zuzites at Ham, the Emites at Shaveh Kiriathaim, and the Horites at Mount Seir, as far as El Paran at the edge of the wilderness. And again, some of these names are probably names at the time that the book of Genesis was written, and not necessarily the names they were known of at the time. Then they turned back and came to En-Mishpat, now called Kadesh, and conquered all the territory of the Amalekites, and also the Amorites living in Hazazon Tamar. And I'm just wondering, it says the territory of the Amalekites, but the Amalekites didn't yet exist at this time. The Amorites probably did, but I'm doubting that the Amalekites were, because I think we're going to read the origin of them a little later in the book of Genesis. But it's the territory that he came and conquered. Then the rebel kings of Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, Zeboim, and Bela, also called Zoar, prepared for battle in the valley of the Dead Sea, or again, the Salt Sea. They fought against King Chedorlaomer of Elam, King Tidal of Goyim, King Amraphel of Babylonia, and King Arioch of Elasar, 4 kings against 5. As it happened, the valley of the Dead Sea was filled with tar pits, and as the army of the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled, some fell into the tar pits, while the rest escaped into the mountains. The victorious invaders then plundered Sodom and Gomorrah and headed for home, taking with them all the spoils of war and the food supplies. They also captured Lot, Abram's nephew, who lived in Sodom, and carried off everything he owned. Now remember that in chapter 13, Lot had moved somewhere near Sodom, but now apparently he's living in the town, and so he gets carried off when the king of Sodom picks a fight with these other kings and loses. But one of Lot's men escaped and reported everything to Abram the Hebrew, who was living near the oak grove belonging to Mamre the Amorite. Mamre and his relatives, Eshcol and Aner, were Abram's allies. When Abram heard that his nephew Lot had been captured, he mobilized the 318 trained men who had been born into his household. Then he pursued Chedorlaomer's army until he caught up with them at Dan. There he divided his men and attacked during the night. Chedorlaomer's army fled, but Abram chased them as far as Hobah, north of Damascus. Abram recovered all the goods that had been taken, and he brought back his nephew Lot with his possessions and all the women and other captives. So this gives us a picture of the nature of life in the ancient world. War was common. You wanted something, you felt like your people needed more economic resources, you took your army out and you defeated somebody else and took their economic resources to bolster up your own. And of course, that's a very selfish thing to do, because whenever you engage in war, then there is destruction. And productive resources are destroyed, therefore no longer productive. Some of the produce is destroyed. People who are able to work and produce goods end up dying in these wars. So in the end, there is less to go around than there was before, and the only reason it works is that, well, the people you defeat, they get the short end of the stick, and you get what they had, so you do better, even though overall in the world there's less to go around. And of course the other thing then is war leads to a lot of death, so then there's fewer people for the resources to go around to, so maybe that kind of evens things out. But still, it's a ridiculous way to live. But left to its own, that's what the human race will do, because that's the nature of sin, selfishness, fear, and everything that goes along with it. That is what sin has done to us. That is what evolution has done to us. That's the mess that we're in. Reading on, verse 17. After Abram returned from his victory over Chedorlaomer and all of his allies, the king of Sodom went out to meet him in the valley of Shaveh, that is, the king's valley. And Melchizedek, the king of Salem, and a priest of God Most High, brought Abram some bread and wine. Melchizedek blessed Abram with this blessing. Blessed be Abram by God Most High, creator of heaven and earth. And blessed be God Most High, who has defeated your enemies for you. Then Abram gave Melchizedek a tenth of all the goods he had recovered. The king of Sodom said to Abram, Give back my people who were captured, but you may keep for yourself all the goods you have recovered. Abram replied to the king of Sodom, I solemnly swear to the Lord, God Most High, creator of heaven and earth, that I will not take so much as a single thread or sandal thong from what belongs to you. Otherwise, you might say, I am the one who made Abram rich. I will accept only what my young warriors have already eaten, and I request that you give a fair share of the goods to my allies, Aner, Eshcol, and Mamre. Now, that means probably that Abram's army that he took to defeat the four kings wasn't just the 318 fighting men from his own household, but that number was enhanced by the warriors that Aner, Eshcol, and Mamre could supply, so that there was a sizable army to defeat the four kings. And of course, then we also have this story of Melchizedek, and we talked about that when we read the book of Hebrews, which makes a big deal out of the story of Melchizedek, saying that Jesus was a priest in the order of Melchizedek, not in the order of Levi and Aaron and Aaron's family. And we suggested, and again the chart that we had before would support this, that perhaps this Melchizedek was in fact Shem. That's a theory. We can't prove it, but let's get that thing open if we can find it. And oh, it opened it twice for me. I don't need it open twice. And then let's do this so it's easier for you to see this. If you have Noah dying here and Shem dying here, and then let's come on. Why won't this thing let me change the picture? All right. Let's do this. These new apps, they don't let you open things. You have to. I don't know why. See, there should be buttons here where I can skip the pictures. Let's just do it this way then. We'll get it open like this. It just took it off the screen on me. Bummer. So let's do it this way. There's more than one way to skin a cat. Most of them aren't very pleasing for the cat, though. This is the one I wanted to look at. So there you can see the line from Noah, if it comes down, if in fact this chart is accurate and the Septuagint is just adding stuff for the sake of it. Then Abram is already a number of years old before Noah dies. And for all of Abram's life, Shem is still alive. We won't say that's for positive for sure, but if so, it would make sense that the person to whom Abram would consider a godly leader would be the oldest living patriarch, namely Shem. And the description in Hebrews, and let me see if I can find that here and read it. Okay, this Melchizedek, this is out of Hebrews chapter 7, was king of Salem and priest of God Most High. He met Abraham returning from the defeat of the kings and blessed him. And Abraham gave him a tenth of everything. First, his name means king of righteousness, then also king of Salem, means king of peace. Without father or mother, without genealogy, without beginning of days or end of life, like the Son of God, he remains a priest forever. Now, that description sounds almost mystical. But if we look at this chart, in Abram's day, nobody living on earth any longer could remember when Shem was born, because he was born before the flood. So only his brothers, if they were still alive, would have been around at that time. He hadn't yet died, so he hasn't had end of days yet, and he doesn't have a beginning. His dad's dead. His mother's probably dead at the same time. By this time in Abram's life, that's probably the case. So he doesn't have a father or mother. He doesn't have beginning of days. Nobody's around to remember that. He hasn't died yet, so he didn't have end of days. And so then the writer of Hebrews uses that to say he remains a king forever, just like the Son of God. So, now we're here where Abram gives him a tenth, and this is the first mention of a tenth or of tithing. And you look at all the goods that were seized. This is the goods of 5 cities. Abraham recovers them. Well, he probably didn't get everything back because, and let's switch screens here. Oh, come on. Bummer, bummer, bummer. Huh. Our other screen has gone dead. So I may have to read out of another thing here. This laptop may be dying. That's a bummer because it's not that old. That other one is years older, and it still works. But
Come get my laptop if you need it.
yeah, yeah, it's doesn't hold a candle to this one.
Well, look what I did. I got the cheapest one I could find.
Yeah.
I married a friend.
Well, let me turn to Genesis 14 is where we've been reading, just so I can cover a few last little things here. We're almost done anyway, so I won't fight with this for now. We'll just go on with this. In fact, let's just do this. That
Yeah,
way
you know what's going to happen?
you won't see that black screen.
You know what's going to happen? You're going to quit talking, and that's going to cause me to wake up.
Probably, yeah. So, yeah, we have the origin of the concept of a tenth, giving a tenth to God when Abram gives a tenth. Now, like I say, he probably didn't get everything back that the kings had taken because probably their armies consumed some of the food on the way and, killed some of the animals, so it wasn't all there. Well, then Abram gives a tenth to Melchizedek, so now there's less of it. And then when the king of Sodom says, well, you keep everything, just give me the people. And Abram says, no, because then you'd say you made me rich. But let these guys have their fair share since they helped me go win this battle. So the people of the 5 cities didn't lose everything, but they lost quite a bit. Probably 30-40% they probably lost, considering what might have been considered a fair share for the 3 men that helped Abram in this battle. Now, one other thing I wanted to address real briefly, and that's found at the beginning of chapter 12. I thought about it when we read it, and then I forgot to mention it. At chapter 12, verse 3, I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse, and all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. Do we really want to say that God curses people?
I don't.
Well, then how are we to understand what that text says?
I have to wonder if the person who wrote it twisted it to make it say what he wanted it to say rather than what was really said.
Well, and the meaning there may be that if people mistreat you, they may find themselves outside of my protection, which will allow bad things to happen to them.
Yeah. But then there's the text in there that says that God sends rain unto the righteous as well as the good, or the bad, the good and the bad both.
Yeah, that's something that Jesus said in Matthew. He said, God makes his sun shine on everybody. He makes the rain fall on everybody. Doesn't matter whether you're good or bad, you get those blessings from God. So.
Yeah, God's going to look out for you, whether you. But ultimately, he's going to step back and let you reap the consequences of what your actions have been.
Right. And that's how we need to understand these references to curses, including the plagues that fell on Pharaoh, as described there at the last part of chapter 12.
Oh, that makes me think. I played this game on Facebook. It's a totally colossally waste of time. And play it, you see a lot of commercials.
Yeah.
Now, I had a commercial come up the other day. It was a man dressed up as Jesus. And, I don't remember the exact wording, but it was saying that, this was Jesus speaking to you, saying that you received this ad as a special um, well, I don't remember what the special was, but a special token, I guess. And he said, I love you, but I need you to take time to listen to me. And if you don't have time for me, then I'm not going to take time for you. And I want to bless you. All you have to do is click on the link to get your code. Once you get your code, I will send you all kinds of blessings. You will receive money. You will receive home. You will receive this, that, and the other. All monetary.
Yeah. Prosperity gospel.
Now, I forgot what you were talking about, but it made me think of that.
Well, we were talking about the passage there in Genesis 12, verse 3, where God is blessing Abram after calling him out of his home country and telling him, I'm going to bless you, and I'm going to make it so that all nations on the earth will be blessed through you.
Okay, so here, this is the case of click on this link and get your code, and I will send you all kinds of monetary rich rewards. And if you don't click on it, I'm going to turn my back on you and let you suffer.
Yeah.
Now, how is that love?
Well, that's somebody trying to coerce you into something.
Yeah, exactly.
That's why it's called advertising.
This whole business of exactly what you just said, but the whole business of trying to manipulate God by saying God's going to send curses if you don't do what I want you to do. I don't buy it.
Yeah.
God doesn't act like that. Now the imposter would.
Yep. Well, we're past our time. We need to sign off for today. So.
Of course we are. I'm waking up.
Yeah. Well, you were here for most of it, so.
In and out.
And your phone was on, so I was able to wake you up when I had that one question. So. Again, we do have a sermon presentation tomorrow. Right now, the plans are to do that live rather than to record it and upload it like we do this. So, what?
Good luck.
Yeah. So, until next week, we say goodbye and God bless.